Good morning, and welcome to Living with the Lectionary. It's a podcast ministry of the Palmacia Presbyterian Church here in Tampa, Florida. It's a weekly recording where pastors and lay people gather each week to consider and reflect on the Gospel Lectionary for this coming Sunday. Our typical pattern is that one of us serves as the facilitator and crafts questions which are sent in advance to everybody else to prepare and reflect. And this week I am serving as the facilitator. So we gather in this recording to share those reflections and to be in dialogue with one another. And today it's my joy to be joined by
Bill Hall in St. Petersburg.
I'm Kenny Hubble. I'm in Tampa in my kitchen, and I'm realizing that I'm dressed quite similarly to my shutters behind me here.
How thought out is that?
Yeah.
I love it. I'm Sarah Mickelson, and I'm one of the members at PCPC, and I am recording from Tampa. I'd like to say good morning to Nancy, a friend of Dawn's, who I understand listens, and to say thank you for your kind words. We continue in year C, and we are looking at Luke 12, verses 32 through 40. It's a continuation exactly from last week. We've skipped a little bit of text, but moving forward from last week to this week, thinking of silos and barns, and now looking at a little bit more information about that. It is the Gospel Lectionary reading for this coming Sunday, August 10th. And since we're handling holy things, it seems to be appropriate to pray. So please join me. Holy and wondrous God, thank you for meeting us here. Thank you for bringing us into the conversation with you. Thank you for pointing out those places where our hearts hold back instead of running forth. Amen. So, reading from the New Revised Standard Version, starting in verse 32. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near, no moth can destroy. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down and eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the middle of the night, near dawn, and finds them, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. And that ends our scripture. So my first question, and I have to give credit to Janet Hunt in her blog, Dancing with the Word. She inspired this question, and I wanted to think about it and bring it forward for us to have a conversation around. What do you think it means to make purses for yourselves that do not wear out? And how do we learn that, or how is that learned? I'm going to come to Bill first. What are your thoughts? How do we make purses that don't wear
out? Thank you for the question. And a general comment, then I will get to your specific question. These are relatively few verses, but boy, there's a lot packed in here. A lot of imagery that even today, centuries later, I feel some affinity with. Now, what does it mean to make purses that do not wear out? The do not wear out in Greek, which the New Testament was written in, literally means grow old. And the imagery is if it's old, it's worn, and thus you need the new. And it took, in my mind, Sarah, a leap to Jesus's new wineskins. The necessity for something new. And I had never thought of this before, but I think he's delivering the same message with a different imagery, wine, and now whatever one puts in a purse, money or keys or whatever. Um, and the unfailing treasure in heaven uh, links it to the eternal, where no thief, moth, um, those are symbols for greed and narcissism, which I'll come back to in another question. Um, and I like this quote from Matt Skinner in his article about this passage. He says, this passage tells about money's ability to impoverish your soul. I like that twist. We think of money as the more we have, the richer you are. And Matt says you're possibly poorer, and it will rewire your values. Matt Skinner continues, the way the parable is explicitly framed, and he said to them, take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. This is earlier in Luke 12. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possession. That makes it warn against greed, acquisitiveness, and egotistic preoccupation with one's own security. It offers an explanation for why otherwise ordinary or hard-working people might end up existing in their own self-absorbed universes. Another powerful phrase, self-absorbed universe, constructing lives in which they do not have to care about anybody else, especially people they can't see or don't want to see. I think that's very contemporary. We can harm people even we do not see personally. Now, for me, my takeaway, Sarah, with your question, is we live in a time when what seems to predominate is the idolatry of greed, power hunger, retribution, punishing those who challenge the persons in power, the rich becoming even more obscenely wealthy. Thus, this narrative makes clear that we have a choice. We can let despair paralyze us, or trust in God's justice and place our confidence that God's kingdom will come on earth as it is in heaven. The first verse you lifted up in the pre-recording, Sarah. First verse says, do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. What do you think, Ken? What does it mean to make purses for yourselves that don't wear out?
I'd say this passage is a lesser known passage. I don't think I see it referenced very directly very often. I don't see it on Instagram bios and that sort of thing. But it's this part of the pericope that you've emphasized is a direct echo from the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is teaching about riches and uses very similar language of not storing up treasures in heaven where moth can destroy and rust can consume. And there's the exact same line, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's to say that there's some good synchronization here within the Gospels, and I think it's bringing our attention to this is a pretty important idea. Where Luke's text differs is this language of the purse, to make yourself a purse that does not wear out. And there's sort of a more positive charge here in that. There's an action step. And I think it's very clear in both texts, the Matthew and the Luke, that we're hearing the warning of material possessions, of earthly wealth, that those things can be stolen, that they can be destroyed. Luke's language of, so make a purse for yourself that does not wear out, I think is a really great expansion of this idea of it puts us towards a proactive investment in the things that endure, which I think is largely people and relationships. Sort of the lifeblood of life is to have connection with one another and with God. And it's to me sounds very much like vessel language. How do we create in ourselves a vessel for God's love, for love of self, for love of neighbor and stranger? That's not easy, and I think it's actually a pretty complicated answer. Your part two here. How is that learned? How is it that we can prepare this purse that does not wear out? And I think this requires a lot of shifts, a lot of perspective change in the things that we're in pursuit of. Because I think of a sort of a sturdy purse, a purse that can hold a lot, especially a lot of love, is a purse well woven with the right sort of materials, the right sort of pursuits. I know I'm getting really kind of metaphorical here, but this idea that we both need to invest in ourselves, meaning we have to, I think, adopt good self-care. We have to take care of our minds. We have to take care of our bodies. We have to take care of our spirits. When we are healthy and strong, we can hold more. When we are drowning and struggling and up against our own worst moments, which is inevitable, that's something we're going to have to contend with. But what we're able to hold becomes a bit more challenged. When we've spent the time in trying to shore up our own vessel, we are then capable of holding more. But essential ingredient in making sure that we are doing well and that we are strong is service of others, is loving our neighbor. And so it's sort of this counterintuitive, like, I think especially younger generations, they have a great emphasis on self-care. It's a very comfortable idea, though I think sometimes that self-care can be too self-centric, forgetting that a big component of self-care is serving other people. This is why if we go on a service trip or a mission trip, so much gratification comes to those who serve, maybe even more so than the impact might be greater on that person serving than it is on the person being served, because just how that nurtures the spirit and how it connects us to each other gives us purpose, gives us meaning. And so I just look at the kind of collective there and say, if we want to learn to weave together a strong and sturdy purse, I think we have to do this culminating work of pouring into ourselves and pouring into others, and certainly orienting ourselves towards God. That tuning our hearts with God's is going to be an essential quality in developing out the materials needed to ensure that our vessels are capable of holding God's love.
Thank you. I'm so glad you went there, because I lifted, or my heart took me toward metaphorical thinking. Exactly. I kind of made a list of things that helped me build a purse of a purse that doesn't wear out. Perhaps it's a simple meal that you prepare for and have with someone else that offers the platform or the foundation for communication. Perhaps it's time spent with each other, listening, which is really sometimes the best part of the conversation is what you hear and how you offer someone your time and your full attention. Maybe making time for volunteer service. It's funny that you also echoed that, or I'm echoing yours. Having a shared vision or a goal to help with somebody or to help someone else. Making time for reflection and prayer and the study of words and actions of Christ. I think that's been really profound in my life. It's been helpful to spend moments of quiet time and letting the Spirit of the Lord move me towards something and let me see it for the first time and maybe look at it differently. And maybe noticing and responding to the needs of others by building connections between their need and resources that you know about. Sometimes that's a treasure. So for me, I went metaphorically because I think those are the kinds of purses that don't wear out. And how do we learn that? We learn that by doing. And I think that's the most valuable part of this is it's an action focused exercise. That leads me to my second question, which is what does be dressed for action and have your lamps lit mean for those who follow Christ? And Ken, I'm coming to you first.
So before I get right into your particular question, I think it's helpful to note that in this passage we get the language of a slave or servant, depending on your translation, and that's I think often because of our contemporary American perspective, we have connotation here. Slave language obviously plays a really important and terrifying and terrible part of our American history. And it's true in other parts of the world as well. And in the ancient world, the connotation's a bit different. It's it's likely considerably less oppressive and more caste system. And why that's important in making a distinction for this text is that because of a slave in the ancient world, a servant of the ancient world, where there's a master and there's what we're talking about readiness, there's an element of part of your identity is in that readiness, is in my role is to prepare and be ready. And that is identity bound. Where for us in our contemporary setting, faith, we want to say is identity bound. And I think we'll claim it as identity bound, but we might more practically operate with it as a compartmentalized part of our life, meaning our church and programmatic ministry and maybe the moments in which I'm praying before a meal or before bed, that's when I'm accessing this kind of faith part of me. But this passage, I think, challenges us to move away from faith being a facet of our lives and more of a permeation of our entire being. For those who are always ready, for those who can kind of receive the call at any hour, to be dressed for action, to have our lamps lit for those who follow Christ, that's your question, is about a perpetual state of connectivity to Christ. And I think that's a exhausting idea for many of us, this notion of, even as Paul teaches us to pray without ceasing, how can we possibly actually make faith permeate our entire being? And we'll fail at that. There's a lot of room for some grace and mercy here, but the notion that if I allowed faith to permeate my parenting and at my job, well, for me, I'm a minister, so that's a little different. But if I'm working at the bank, that's still, how does it permeate my work relationships, my family relationships? How does it permeate the way I look in the mirror? How does it permeate how I come to mundane tasks? We almost get sort of like a Franciscan rule, a monastic life, which seems unrealistic to most. But I think that really is the goal. I think that is the sort of readiness. And I think, Sarah, in light of our pre-recording discussion, that mindset's really going to help us come to the third question, and this larger idea that we'll see in a moment. I don't want to jump the gun there, but that's sort of this prepares us for what is to come, and it's pretty important.
You brought to mind Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. I'm coming to your house today. And how that affected how he did what he did for a living. And how he elaborated on, I'm gonna give back the money that I've swindled other people from, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna live from this moment on forward in a way that's in accordance with that. This idea of being dressed for action and having your lamps lit, it's always been intimidating to me. What if I'm caught unaware? That's a scary idea for me. And so from the very beginning, I've been seeking to find a familiar way to wrap myself around preparation and what is being addressed here. Maybe it was me attending so many revivals when I was little and wondering if my name was in the book of the Lamb, and and asking the question of my father, and my father going, okay, and letting me in on the idea that each day we move toward that. So I've kind of come around to a new understanding or a new way of thinking about this. And so I've been humming this hymn in my head, and it goes, people get ready, there's a trainer coming. You know this one? So I'm thinking about, what does it look like to get ready? And I wanted to find a really good imagery for this. So I thought about, what does it mean to train for a marathon? Or what does it mean to rehearse for some kind of performance? And it takes consistent, disciplined effort. You build muscle memory if you're a runner. You build pacing. You figure out your breathing. You practice a lot. And if it's for a performance, you're building behavioral memory. You're building behavioral memory layered with language and movement and music, perhaps, so that it becomes second nature and you have a responsiveness that's built around that structure. And if you think about, and this is what I was kind of spinning in my head, is what are we being asked to be prepared for? And how does that determine our way of studying or our practice or discipline to build that muscle memory? And so I kind of went, all right, what's a simple way to think about this? Because I need to put my head in this right space. And I'm thinking about the steps that you take to prepare a meal for someone else. First, you come up with a recipe. You got to go to the grocery. You set aside time to build the meal. It's deliberate and planful work. The first time you go at making a recipe, it may be clumsy and unsure, and it may be messy, and it takes longer, and the results are kind of inconsistent. But each time you work through that recipe, you get better. You get smoother, you get more graceful at the preparation, and suddenly, it seems, you're simply making it from memory. And by feel, like how does the dough feel? And you have become so practiced at the recipe that you know exactly when it's at its very best for a presentation. And it seems to me that being dressed for action means knowing something by heart, so that you can move forward with confidence and ease when you're asked to. And Jesus calls us to practice, to follow, to watch, to plan, to do, to reflect, to be prepared, to be the prepared ones when help is needed. So people get ready, there's a train coming. Bill, it's up to you.
Sarah, my mind on this question, first of all, this phrase is an example of what I said at the start. These relatively few verses are packed with power, if I may say it that way. So my mind divided out the three key words and phrases. First, dressed. Second, action. Third, lamps lit. Dressed. It reminded me that years ago, in a premarital counseling process, toward the end, I would engage the couple in inviting them to participate in planning the wedding. And often it had to do with, or is there a scripture you want? And of course, many wanted 1 Corinthians 13, which is not a wedding passage, but it's the famous love chapter. One time, this particular time, I heard for the first time ever a request for a scripture, Colossians in chapter 3. I will read phrases. Clothe yourselves with a new self, which is being renewed in knowledge according to the image of the Creator. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And since then, when a couple was struggling, I would suggest that. I think it's a power, again, it's not about marriage, but that powerful image of what it means to be dressed and what it engenders in us. And you can find references to clothing yourselves with Christ and the new self in Ephesians 4, Galatians 3. Galatians 3:27 makes a bold statement. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There's a powerful statement. Clothing yourself with Christ for action. You're not putting on a show. You're not walking down the red carpet at the Academy Awards. You're prepared to act. And verse 36, they opened the door for the master. Verse 37, waiting and alert to serve when the master returns. So we're to be clothed for action and lamps lit. Matthew 5:15, people do not light a lamp and put it under the bushel. Rather, they put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. And my takeaway is this. Jesus is calling for a congruence between how we are dressed outwardly and what we're like inside. And Ken, you inadvertently offered an example of congruence. You chose that your attire is congruent with your background this morning. I got a chuckle when you mentioned that. And our inner thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs are reflected in and are congruent with our outward appearance and behavior. The way you think is the way you will act. Thus, we are to be prepared to reflect the light of Jesus Christ and the will of God in our actions. For Jesus to say this, which is very challenging, and I don't fully measure up, none of us do, it means I can move in that direction. I can be dressed for actions and with my lamp lit so I see the world as God sees it, at least in part. That's what I got.
Thank you, Bill. So my third question is that I'm thinking about the imagery used in verses 39 and 40 with what are your thoughts about the thief and the Son of Man imagery used in these verses? And might they be one and the same? And this is kind of an interesting place to jump off. I will volunteer that it is a leap, so that I wanted just to kind of talk a little bit about that. And in my cooking scenario, in making that meal for the company that I'm hoping will come, I wondered about what it would feel like to be unprepared when that company arrives versus being prepared. And if unexpected company shows up, that changes the experience that the host has from that of the prepared host. So an unprepared host might make 9 trips to the grocery to gather goods instead of 1. You might have to stop and wash the needed tools in the kitchen because they were dirty. And company always seems to arrive too soon, and everything is disorganized, and the kitchen steals precious time from the company. But for the prepared host, the recipe has been practiced. The resources are available, the table is set. The meal is almost ready when the company arrives. The host is calm and ready to welcome the company. Time is available for conversation and everyone is relaxed. This scenario feels so much better from the host's perspective and from the company's perspective. I said, no wonder Jesus wants us to be ready. It's the sense of preparation internally as well as externally, so that should the moment arise, you can welcome the company, the unexpected company and the expected company. And I really like that idea. Ken, this comes to you. No, Bill, what's my order? Bill, this comes to you next. You're muted. There you go.
We're on the third question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You set my thinking, and I wanted to make sure I was back on track. This, Ken noted in the pre-recording, I can echo, this was a challenging question. Here's where my mind went. Um, Caroline Lewis reminded us that the scripture does not say if the Son of Man is coming, but when he comes. Another powerful promise. And thief, son of man, of course, at first I recoiled. They're totally different. And that's sort of where my mind stayed, Sarah. I think part of the power is, at least it's possible to take away. Jesus offers a very powerfully negative imagery of somebody breaking into my house and stealing what is mine. The Son of Man, Jesus Christ, does not do that, but I think it's possible to take Jesus saying, if you think you should be on guard to protect yourself from the thief, how much more should you be alert and ready to receive Jesus Christ when he comes? Now, given our current national and global context, my mind went to the possibility that the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, shows up every day. Matthew 25. When you help somebody, who are you helping? Jesus Christ. When you neglected them, who were you neglecting? That person and Jesus Christ. I find that powerful. And I think you talked about this in a recent one of these podcasts, Ken, that a seemingly accidental encounter with a person in need is an opportunity to serve Jesus Christ and to welcoming the coming of the Son of Man. Throughout my life, partly shaped by my father, I've never been impressed when people are negatively impressed when people claim they know when Jesus is coming back. What do they often do? Isolate themselves, go to a mountaintop or a retreat and sit with their hands folded, waiting for Christ to come. And of course, it hadn't happened yet. I believe it will. I believe there is a time in God's choice when the kingdom will be fully fulfilled. But in that sense, I like the idea that the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, returns and will return.
Ken, we come to you. What are your thoughts?
There's a comedian who starts one of his jokes with how he doesn't believe in God. He's an atheist. And then he goes on to expand just how much he hopes, because he's taken this stance, that there is no God. In fact, he's like, I pray to God that God is not real. And there's this funny dichotomy of he feels the burden if he chooses this and is wrong about this, that it will go poorly for him, and it's crude and uh, but it demonstrates this real tension of how we are or are not oriented to God. And for all of us, that's likely a probably complicated road. And all of us who are growing up in different environments and are exposed to different elements of faith and traditions, it's no surprise that there are many who come to faith and the contents of faith through really unhealthy channels, just as many as there are who go through faith and church and the experience of God's love in really natural and positive ways. It's to say that it's quite a mixed bag and creates uh, an uneven balance in our world and our society where we have different experiences of faith, and that really orients us differently to God. And Sarah, the question you bring up of our perception of God or Christ as the thief or the Son of Man, that kind of overlay depends on what our background is and our experiences are. If we are folks who have come to faith really organically and healthily and fully, the idea of Christ's return feels like this the Son of Man, and it's this positive imagery. And then the inverse of that, um, if we've felt rejection from God, if we've felt persecution, judgment, the things that make faith and tradition really complicated, might that feel more like stealing, a thief in the night? And that's not about the nature of God. That's largely about the complicated um, and sometimes malevolent and corrupt parts of institutionalized religion. Those are things that we should distinguish here. Jesus is not changing. The ministry of Jesus reflects a very particular set of values. The church's interpretation and adaptation and structures of ministry have sometimes, I think, mixed up what the nature of Christ's love has looked like. I want to point us back to where we talked about treasure in this passage. And if God is our treasure, if that's an earnest thought, then I think we come to feel really rich. Um, when God is our treasure and we feel like the pursuit of faith and service and humility and gentleness and compassion, all all the things that hopefully come with that, we will likely reflect on our lives and relationships with a real sense of wealth. But I think it's important that we understand that that is a confusing and foreign concept to many people, even those who have their backgrounds in faith, but especially for those who are quite removed and have never really encountered God in a way that the three of us might say very genuinely, this is how we understand God and our relationship with God. So this text, while it has some sort of apocalyptic language, speaks to the return of the Son of Man. I think first and foremost, it's a text about money and material wealth and possession that comes in terms of the larger uh, Lucan text here, or the passage, sort of as a litany of different teachings and parables of Jesus on earthly possessions. And so I think as we read this and try to get to the heart of this text, we sort of need to stay in that tension of this being about our perceptions of wealth and trying to move towards what I think God is calling us to, a more gratifying lifestyle that looks like investing in relationships, weaving that purse that looks like the sort of enduring wealth of relationships, and then coming to try to, or maybe just even enjoying the opportunity to perceive God as the Son of Man, and that sort of staying in the positive. That's a blessing in itself when that image comes most naturally.
Thank you. I really value that. I'm reminded of Les Miserables, um, a book by Victor Hugo and also a fairly well-known stage play. There's this moment where the priest welcomes Jean Valjean into his home and offers a meal and shelter and bed. And in the middle of the night, Jean Valjean gets up and steals the candlesticks and takes them, and eventually is caught by the gendarme, and the priest comes to where that occurs, and the priest stops the gendarme from arresting Jean Valjean, and offers the silverware in addition to the candlesticks, to say, you forgot to take these to the silversmith for polishing, and I'm going to give them to you now so you can take them with you when you take the candlesticks, almost to authenticate the stealing that Jean Valjean went through, thinking he was going to do something one way. And it turns out that this starts a lifelong friendship between the priest and Jean Valjean, and gives the foundation for something positive to happen in both of their lives. That was always a turning point for me in that book. And I think that's another way of thinking about stealing and about the Son of Man, and the way that we greet the opportunity when it's ready. Listeners, I hope that these questions and responses have spurred in you a desire to dive deeper into what God might be saying to you with this text. If you have any questions, or you want to share your thoughts, we would love to hear from you. You can find us at podcast@palmacia.org. We also invite you to visit our our website at palmacia.org, where you can learn more about the mission and ministry of our congregation and our church, the Palmacia Presbyterian Church. I'd also like to draw your attention to our sister podcast that's recorded on Monday, called The First Look. And it's exactly that, a quick first impression on one of the lectionary texts for the coming Sunday. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us, and for listening to our conversation. And we hope that God moves in your life this week. Take care, and God bless.